iOS modes and navigation. We're going ultra practical with this one. I'm going to keep it in the live interface almost the entire time as you get familiar with the iOS. Now, I'm going to assume at this point in the series that you've got some lab equipment sitting by you. You've gone through the console enabling nuggets, you've gotten connected, and this is what you're seeing, or something similar to it. When you connect into a console port, this is displayed when you first log in. Now, if it's not displayed, if you're just sitting there on the blank screen, just press the Enter key a couple times. There is no harm, well, unless there's something typed there that you don't know, there's no harm ever in just hitting the Enter key a couple times when you're working on a Cisco device, just to see where the line is. So if your console port is unplugged, or, let's say it's sitting like this, but the screen was closed, let's just close this thing down and bring Putty back up. There we go. We click on Open, and what do you see? Absolutely nothing. It's a black screen. That's okay. Just hit Enter a couple times and you'll be sitting at the prompt wherever you left off. If you ever want to get back to that logged out state, you can type in Exit, and that drops you back to the router. Console port is now available. Press Return to get started. Hit Return a couple times, and there we're sitting at the prompt. This initial prompt that you log into is known as user mode. It's fairly useless for an administrator because you can't really do much from this mode. Now, I know I'm in user mode because I can just look at the prompt. You see the name of the router, which is router, and this little right angle bracket right beside it. That tells me user mode, and that'll make a lot more sense when you see the other modes. You have the host name with the little right angle bracket. That means I'm very limited. So one of the first things an administrator will do is type in the command enable, which takes you from user mode to privilege mode. And normally on a production advice, and my advice to you is on a production device, it would be password protected. You would have something blocking everybody from getting to this mode, because as soon as you're into privilege mode, you have root-like permissions to this router, admin-like permissions, where you can do just about anything, including erase the configuration completely. So I know I'm in privilege mode because I see the prompt change from the right angle bracket to the host name with the pound symbol sitting right beside it. Now, one of the things I'm going to do in the next nugget is go through all of the shortcuts that you can use and ways of navigating in and out quickly of the iOS. But one of the commands I'll talk about in there, and I want to show you right now, is the question mark. The reason why is because I want you to see the difference between these two modes. Notice, I disabled myself, so I'm back in user mode. I'm going to hit the question mark, and that displays the list of commands that I can do at this prompt. I want you to just get a feel. Access enable, access profile, call, clear, connect, crypto, disable. It's enough, right? You get kind of the feel for it. It seems like a lot of commands. I'll hit the space bar, which scrolls down the page. It's like, okay, good. It's a lot of commands, like two almost full pages of commands that I saw there. Now I'm going to type in enable and do it again. I'll hit the question mark. And first off, you see, notice access enable, access profile, same commands right there, access template, ALPS, archive, audio prompt. So obviously there's more commands here than there were before. Matter of fact, I'll just hit the space bar, space, 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 right? Space. We went from almost 2 pages of commands to probably somewhere around 4.5, 5 pages of commands that you're able to do. Notice as we move into privilege mode, more commands become available to you. Even though this may seem like a lot of commands, I can't actually configure anything yet. From privilege mode, all these commands are really geared around verifying things on my router, testing things on my router, testing connectivity. I'm not actually doing configuration from privilege mode. For that, I need to go into global configuration mode. And I think you're starting to get the feel, maybe, basically, of a Cisco device, and this is routers and switches. They both use the iOS. They both have the same syntax. Each mode of configuration that you go in accomplishes different things. From user mode, I accomplish very little things. Think of it as if you're walking into a really, really big house. So it's like a giant house like this. Actually, that little square didn't work right there. So there's the front door, right? You walk into this really big house. This is user mode, and you can do virtually nothing. And there's only one door in that initial room, and that's the door to privilege mode, right? So you come into privilege mode where you've got a room like this. It's pretty big. That's where you can, do some show commands. It's like your dining room, right? You can look around, see some paintings on the wall. You can see the little statue sitting there in the corner. You're like, this thing's looking pretty good, because that's the goal of privilege mode, is just to be able to look around and see things, right? So maybe it's a balcony where I'm looking at the entire thing. But but you still can't do anything. There's only one door in the privilege mode room, and that's the door to global configuration mode. Now, global configuration mode is just like privilege mode. There's a lot of things that you can do in there, but the biggest thing is that there's lots of doors. Hundreds of doors sitting in global configuration mode that leads to all the other faculties of the router or the house, if you will, right? So in global configuration mode, let's go there. Some of you are like, where does he get these analogies? I honestly make them up. They just come to me as I'm talking to you. This is the first time I've ever used that analogy in 20 years of training, if you can believe that. So I'm glad this happened right here, actually. So brief side note, because I know many of you are following along with me. You're going through these different modes, and I really recommend that you do. You may get this prompt. Matter of fact, your cursor may be sitting at the end of it. Don't be afraid. Press the Enter key. This happens on almost every Cisco device if you boot it and it doesn't have a configuration. See, Cisco devices have this really cool feature. See how it's still like, it's still spitting out stuff. They have this really cool feature that when you boot them up, if they don't have a config, they actually send out broadcast messages saying, "Hello, network. Does anybody have a configuration file for me?" Because you can see right here, it's saying, "Hello, network," and that's 25525. That's a broadcast. It's going everywhere. It's saying, "Does anyone have a file called cisconet.config for me? Does anyone have a file called network config for me?" Now you might be wondering, why is it asking that? Well, it's a built-in feature of Cisco devices. Cisco was thinking, they're like, you may be configuring hundreds of these things, and maybe you have a template config that you just place on every device that sets the same passwords, that sets the same console settings, that sets the same, all of the settings. We haven't even talked about that yet, right? So they're going to go in there and have this device start broadcasting for these different file names, so you or I could go into the network and set up a server that has that base config file. So get this, you pull all these devices out of the box, they have no config, so they start broadcasting it. If you set up the servers right, in the network, they can be like, oh, here you go, and they can automatically configure your devices for you, at least with a base configuration, so you just have to do a little tweaking after that. Isn't that cool? But it's really annoying if you don't have that server, because you see this message until you save your configuration or until you turn this feature off. So if you see this message, don't freak out. Just hit the Enter key a couple times, move right by. It's known as a syslog message, a status message that's coming through. So what was I talking about? Doors, houses, analogies. So we went from user mode into privilege mode, and then we went into global configuration mode, or we are going to, right? So let's do this. Config T. Now, I can't even say the full thing. I'm so used to using shortcuts, which I'm going to talk about in the next nugget, that I just do. So you can actually use shortcuts and press the tab key to finish the command for you. So you could type out configure terminal, that's the full command. Or, hang on, let me type in exit and back out. See, I'm moving back into privilege mode. I can type in conf T, little shortcut, and that moves me there. Shortcuts. All in the next nugget. I don't want to derail myself from there. So I'm sitting in global configuration mode. Let me hit the question mark now. Notice, first off, completely different commands. I don't know if you've got one of those memories that remembers things when you see it. That's normally what they call a memory. But these commands are totally different than the ones I showed you at first. And I think user mode, 2 pages, privilege mode, 5 pages, global configuration mode, what's that? 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I'm not even going to count. I just keep going and going and going and going and going, right? It's just tons of commands. But again, all of these commands are focused on global settings of the router. What's a global setting? Well, like the name of the router. That globally affects it, right? So I could type in a command host name, CBT router. Right? And hit enter, and notice my prompt immediately changes to CBT router. I don't want you to focus on the commands at this point. Just getting the feel for the kind of changes that you can make. So obviously, scroll. A lot of global configuration settings can be configured from here. But again, the power of global is that you can move to one of hundreds of sub-configuration modes. And I will tell you right now, you will never know them all. For some people, that's discouraging. For some, that's encouraging. You will never know all the modes. There's interface mode, for example, to set the interfaces on this device. Hang on, I actually don't, I just looked at it. So I can type in interface fast Ethernet 0/0. Notice as I do that, the mode changes into config-if. Now all the commands, again, completely different than what they were in global configuration. All these commands affect the interface. So I'm moving between rooms of this house. I just moved into the interface configuration mode, and I can change settings affecting that one interface. Every command I type affects only this one interface on the router, right? Are you starting to get the feel? As I'm hitting the enter key to go one line at a time, I'll hit Q to stop that output. So that's the feel of the different modes. Interface, line configuration mode. By the way, the console port isn't considered an interface, it's considered a line. So I can type in line console 0. There's only one console port, and so I'm in line mode where I can configure things on the console port. Like let's set a password on the console port. I'll put password Cisco, right? And then require logins to that console port. So now I'm going to back out. I'm using some quick shortcuts already. Exit, and I'm sitting now at the console prompt. I hit enter, and it's asking me for a password, which it didn't ask the first time. I type in Cisco, and I'm in. So again, I just want to give you the feel at this point for the different modes. Now, key information. I use this analogy for a reason. When you walk in the front door, you're in user mode. Do you see any door in user mode that lets you go straight to global? No, you have to walk through the privilege room. And once you're in the privilege room, you have to walk through the door to the global room to get to the interface. You can't just hop from privilege to interface. So it is a tiered system or a hierarchical, how would you say that? You have to go this direction. I can't go into user mode and type in configure terminal to get into global config. It's like, sorry, bad command, right? I have to type in enable first to get to privilege mode. Then I can type in configure terminal to get to global configuration. Then I can type in, for instance, interface fast Ethernet 0/0 and get into interface configuration mode. It's like I'm walking up a mountain. It even feels that way as you look at the prompt. I start at the ground level. I walk up to the first bramble brush or something like that. And now I'm on the first hill. Now I'm at a taller hill. I'm moving up the mountain. If I want to move back, there's a couple ways I can do that. I can type in exit, which takes me back one level at a time. So I'm in interface mode, exit out, I'm in global. Exit out, I'm in privilege, right? Exit out, and I would actually leave the router. This one, you don't actually go back to user. That one just kills your connection. If you type in disable, you go back to user because Cisco knows nobody wants to go back to user, right? So I'm going to type in enable, config T, go into interface, fast Ethernet 0/0, and now you're seeing an interface. So exit takes you one level at a time. I could type in end and drop back all the levels at a time, right? Cisco also created a nice little shortcut to do that. You can hit Control-Z, and that drops you back. So that's the same effect as the end command. The thing I love about Control-Z is it's like grab the parachute, you're jumping no matter what. So for instance, if I'm sitting there at interface fast Ethernet 0/0 doing some config, and I'm like, description of this interface is cool interface, and I'm typing some commands, and I'm right here. Obviously I can't type in end because there's a bunch of stuff before it, right? No matter what, I type in end, it doesn't work. But if I've got a whole bunch of stuff and I hit Control-Z, it's the parachute, right? It's like bail out. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Drop all the way back to privilege mode. So what I want you to do on your router right now is just practice. Practice going into the different modes. If you're curious, what interfaces does my router have? Because you may not have a fast Ethernet 0/0. You can type in the command from user or privilege mode, show IP interface brief. This is my favorite command in all Cisco routers because it shows you all the interfaces that you have. So I see this router has 4 interfaces, 2 fast Ethernet interfaces, and 2 serial interfaces. We'll talk about the syntax of this a little bit later. I see all the configuration settings of it, like the IP address and the status of the interface, if it's plugged in or not. So that's how you can see what interfaces are on your router. Move in and out of those modes. Get used to doing that. But there's also, and I know you're going to want to tinker, right? That's why the only command I want to show you in here, the only configuration command is the no command. Because maybe you did what I did, right? You named your router CBT router, and you're like, oh no, I don't want that. That's my company's router. I don't want it to say CBT. How do I go back? You can always go back. So first off, let me ask you a question. What mode were we in when we changed that name? Global, right? So I have to go back into global configuration mode. Anyone remember the command? It was hostname. Right? I can type in hostname, and it's, I didn't obviously finish it, so it's incomplete, and change the name of the router. Now, before I go any further, if I were to type hostname from privilege mode, Notice it. Well, why did I do that? I'll show you this in a little while. You have to. There's like a penalty. I have to wait now of 60 seconds for it to sit there and stick. It's actually trying to telnet to a device named hostname, but essentially it's broken. It's saying that command doesn't exist. So let me see if I can bail out. There we go. Okay. So I want to remove the hostname. How do I do it? So I'm going to go into global configuration and type in no hostname. The no command defaults anything that you do. So, for instance, you see on my fast Ethernet 0/0, I have an IP address. So, if I were to go into that interface, fast Ethernet 0/0, and type in no IP address, and I know we haven't talked about these commands yet, that's fine, don't worry about it. That removes the IP address from the interface. So now I'll hit Control-Z, drop back, and type in show IP interface brief, hit the enter key, and you can see now that IP address that was there before has now gone to unassigned. So play around, get some lab equipment, tinker, try things out. No will always move that command back to what it was before. So we have seen the core modes on a Cisco device. Oh, I just got to show you something. I know I overwhelm people sometimes with enthusiasm and excitement and too much information, but I got to show this to you. Somebody might say, well, if those are the core modes, right, and I want to validate your feeling. We haven't talked enough about these. That's going to be the upcoming nuggets, right? But if those are the core 5 modes, we'll say, what other modes are you? Watch this. I'm going to type in global configuration mode, alias, and hit the question mark. So the alias command creates a shortcut, an alias for some other command. And the syntax of this is you type in alias and then what mode you want to create the alias for. Like for instance, let's just scroll down. I'm laughing because these are all modes. So right there is the interface configuration mode, right? So if I wanted to create an alias for interface configuration where we went in for fast Ethernet 0/0, I would type in interface. So these are all modes. These are all doors in our house with potentially hundreds of commands inside of the CPU configuration mode, the credentials configuration modes, right? And I will tell you, after being in Cisco for 16 years, I can maybe tell you the use of I'm going to give myself some credit and be like 30% of these modes, maybe. That's how many doors and configuration mode. I bet, okay, I got to give myself a little more than that. You're like 16 years, 20%, 30%, maybe 31%. There are literally so many different modes that you can do things in. But that to me is exciting because I'm like, I'm never going to reach the end of the knowledge that you can get in the network world. Okay. So we have seen the core modes, how to move between modes, and then how to bail yourself if you've typed a command that you don't think should be in there. Use the no. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.